According to an NFL insider, Eagles general manager Howie Roseman is not done yet. Still working the phones in the lead up to Tuesday's NFL trade deadline, even after Philadelphia made what I thought was a fantastic trade, fulfilling a need for safety Kevin Byard. So this quote coming from Dianna Russini on the Ryan Russillo podcast, and credit to her, since moving from ESPN to The Athletic, she's had some really good scoops on some stories across the NFL. And when pressed about the Eagles trade for Byard and how Howie Roseman kind of operates as an executive in this sport, this is what Russini had to say to Russillo. I've talked to tons of teams across the league, and it's like, Howie's calling. Of course Howie's calling. Howie's not done, by the way. You look at Philly right now, and obviously the Tush Push is the story. Maybe they want to look at offensive line for some insurance there, knowing they can get banged up there. Maybe a linebacker that can cover. They can certainly use one in Philadelphia. We're going to dissect that, but also a longtime former NFL general manager who's friends with Howie Roseman also thinks that Howie could continue to wheel and deal. First, if a trade happens, we're going to talk about it here on Eagles Now. We're going to do a video. We're going to go live because that's the standard for Eagles Talk right here on YouTube. Anytime there's something juicy out there pertaining to the Birds, this is the go-to spot. And as you can see, we're 137 subscribers away from 60,000 subscribers. So can we get to 59,000 subscribers, We do shows every single day, approaching 60K, I should have said, but 137 subscribers to 59K. Make sure you hit that subscribe button down below for year-round coverage of the Birds. So, off that report from Dianna Russini, my first question is, well, do the Eagles really need offensive line help? Is that an area on this football team that they need to address going into Tuesday's deadline? You first look at the regular starting offensive line for Philadelphia. This is something that we pitted as a strength going into the regular season. And before Cam Jurgens got hurt with that foot injury against the Washington Commanders, I thought this offensive line was playing pretty well for the most part. I think it takes a couple of weeks to get into a groove. There are so many nuances to playing offensive line, especially in this offensive scheme with all of the pull blocks, the timing of the snap cadence, running a little bit of RPO, and then the pass game that is the extension off of that. So Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Jason Kelce, Cam Jurgens, and Lane Johnson, that's a really good offensive front that can help fortify this offense, both with the run game and in the pass game. But since Cam Jurgens has gone down, as evidenced by numbers that we're about to show you, and Tua Opeta has replaced the former second-round pick out of Nebraska, this is an Eagles offensive line that has struggled a little bit, especially in running the football. Some in-depth rushing numbers for you. When Jurgens was flanking Jason Kelce and Lane Johnson at right guard in the 4 games that he played this year for Philadelphia, the Eagles' rushing offense was much better as compared to the last 3 games that he's been out. And by the way, he's on IR right now, so has to miss at least one more game. But in those first 4 matchups, Philadelphia ran it 140 times after barely running it against the Patriots in Week 1, 661 yards as DeAndre Swift was going off at that point. That was good for 4.7 yards per carry and 5 touchdowns on the ground. Without Cam Jurgens and with Tua Opeta, the rushing numbers have gone down dramatically. The Eagles are throwing the ball a little bit more, and the total is a little bit less as far as the total carries, from $140 to 95, but the production is way down, nearly cut in half, 3.6 yards per carry and 4 touchdowns. So you kind of look at this scenario and you're like, well, if you get Jurgens back, you'll be all good. But what if another injury happens along that offensive line, especially on the interior? Then what happens? And then the conversation then pivots to the fact that maybe Philadelphia, like Dianna Russini said, does need to upgrade along the offensive line. 3 interior offensive line trade targets that I'm kind of pinpointing here. Cody Whitehair, he is benched pretty much by the Chicago Bears at this point. He's sitting on the depth chart. He's not getting any playing time, but he's played in more than 100 games in his career, can play a little guard, can play a little center. Jermaine Eluemunor has played guard and tackle throughout his career, came into the year as a tackle for the Las Vegas Raiders. He's been benched, though, and I think he's a little bit too slow to maybe play on the perimeter of that offensive line. You bump him inside, you pair him up with a guy like Jeff Statlin, and really any of these offensive linemen I think could suffice or at least help the Eagles get by. And then the same kind of story is hovering around Ezra Cleveland, the guard for the Minnesota Vikings. They're going with other options right now, and Ezra Cleveland not really playing. He could be a cheap trade candidate as well. Now, we're only getting started here on today's show. Coming up next, that former NFL general manager who's boys with Howie Roseman does not think that Howie is done. We'll talk about that. First, though, let's bring this back. Name this Eagle. I want everybody to drop those guesses down in the comment section, and later on today's show, we're going to reveal who number 59 in the midnight green is here to my right. First, though, Eagles Now, sponsored by ZBiotics. You can get 15% off using the promo code ChatSports at zbiotics.com/chatsports. We're also going to pop up this QR code here on screen so that you can simply scan that with your phone and you can see the magic that ZBiotics brings to the table. Look, let's face it. All of our watch parties this year have gone crazy, and after y'all hit me with a bunch of super chats, I don't bounce back great the next day. Sometimes I'm hurting. That is until I found ZBiotics. It's a pre-alcohol probiotic and the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down, and it's designed to work like your liver, but in your gut, where you need it the most. So drink ZBiotics before drinking alcohol. Drink responsibly, as we always do during our watch parties, even though we go hard, and get a good night's sleep to feel your best tomorrow. This is the packaging that it will come in, and I do a lot of traveling, so I like how I can put one of these bottles in a travel case, and I know I'm going to be taking down some beers, some drinks. You know, it's the October fall beer season, so drinking a lot of Oktoberfest and pumpkin beer, sometimes high in alcohol content. Always love me a whiskey soda with a little bit of lime. Throw some tequila in a mixed drink as well, and I can bounce back with ZBiotics. So one more time, 15% off at zbiotics.com/chatsports. We'll put that link down below in the comment section as well as in the description of this video. You can also sign up for a subscription as well if you're like me and you like to have a lot of fun. So to that aforementioned general manager, Thomas Dimitroff, former longtime GM for the Atlanta Falcons. He is close with Howie Roseman, as he said on this interview with Kay Adams that we're about to show you, and as well as guys like Brandon Beane, who are sound analytically, but also really aggressive in trying to improve their football teams. And why I love what Howie Roseman brings to the table and why I like how he operates, this dude's a cold-blooded killer. He's pulled off so many highway robberies. He wakes up thinking of ways to improve the Philadelphia Eagles. He goes to bed thinking of ways to improve the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, that's how I approach this show. Sometimes I'll literally wake up at 3 a.m. and I'm like, you know what, I want to try this on tomorrow's show. Like, Howie Roseman kind of thinks about things in that way as a general manager in this game. And Thomas Dimitroff said to Kay Adams, look, I don't think that Howie is done making moves here, even though they made a move that I really like in bringing in Kevin Byard. So here's what Dimitroff had to say. I don't think Philadelphia is done. He didn't allude to anything like that, but he did say this is something they keep their eye on, and that's Howie's job. He's not worried about game planning. This is about trying to make the best for this team. Howie is about making headway as the best trader in sport right now, and that's what I believe he's doing. Pretty high praise from Dimitroff to say he thinks Howie Roseman the best trader in sport. He's not talking about in the sport. He's talking about all of sports. That's the proper journalistic English way to say all of sports. We're talking all of professional sports is what Dimitroff is saying, and I don't think he's far off because we know that Howie is uber aggressive. The value in the players that he gets with some of these trades, it's a big reason why Philadelphia is in this spot. Coming off a Super Bowl appearance, and if the season were to end right now going into Week 8, they'd be the number 1 seed in the NFC. So if Howie and Philadelphia, they do make another move, here are areas to address. Russini talked about offensive line, and she talked about linebacker. I don't really think that offensive line is a big issue for this club. You have the best offensive line coach in the NFL in Jeff Statland, and I like the players that are there. Some people might complain about Jack Driscoll, but he's much better when he has a week to plan for game preparation as compared to just being thrust into action. That's when he really struggled, when he had to replace Lane Johnson against the Jets. So in order here, the areas to address in my eyes for this team: slot corner, backup running back, or a running back who can split some carries with DeAndre Swift. You can still utilize Kenneth Gainwell a bit, and you're pretty much only using Boston Scott as a kick returner. And of course, against the New York Giants, off-ball linebacker and then edge rusher depth as well. So there are a couple of different ways you can look at some of the trade targets for Philadelphia. I'd say that Kevin Byard is a pretty high leverage type of trade. It's not necessarily like an F them picks type of trade target. And we do have a list of several players who, if the Eagles want to get the poker chips, put them in the middle of the table, they do want to say F them picks. And they just want to go for it, knowing that Howie is a magician with the cap, and they have a lot of draft capital in 2024 and in years ahead. They mortgage a lot of those types of assets for these types of players. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Philadelphia goes star hunting here, going after a player like Brian Burns, edge rusher for Carolina. Everything that I've heard coming out of the Panthers organization, we're not going to trade Brian Burns away. That could also be translated as, we haven't gotten a good offer yet, and this is a player who's on an expiring deal, one of the best edge rushers in the game. 9 sacks every year he's been in the league except for 1. We're going to give him away for a first-round pick because we're not going to re-sign him. So you can balk and you can try to say those things, which I believe are for leverage and fabricated at points. But if a great deal comes your way for a player like Brian Burns, do you decide to send him to Philadelphia to try to chase a championship for Burns? And then Aaron Donald. Like, Los Angeles Rams have been really competitive this year. They were competitive once again last week, lost that game to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Some weird officiating calls late in that game. But if Aaron Donald doesn't want to play for the Rams any longer, knowing that his career is going to last all that much longer beyond this year, he wants to get Super Bowl ring number 2. Could Philadelphia go after Aaron Donald because he could play a little bit of edge, a little bit of defensive tackle? Danielle Hunter having a great year, contract year. Going into week 8, he led the NFL in sacks. Saquon Barkley has said, I don't want to be traded by the New York Giants, but he's on an expiring deal. And if the Giants can get back quality assets for a running back who they might not re-sign and had reservations about signing to a long-term deal, could they part ways with one of the faces of their franchise? And then you look at 3 more players here. Chase Young, Montez Sweat, 2 players on the Washington Commanders who could get dealt. Russini talked about that in that podcast with Russello. If you want to go all in for another wide receiver, Mike Evans, but I don't think Philadelphia has to go that route. I'm cool with bringing in Julio Jones, and then you let A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith-Cook get Dallas Goedert more involved in the pass game. I think you're set with that aerial attack. And then Patrick Surtain is a player that I would really like. James Bradbury and Darius Slay are both over 30. And while I like what Eli Ricks did last week, he's not a Patrick Surtain. That's a franchise cornerstone that you could bring in who could be an impact player for a really long time for your defense. Those are players that the Eagles could trade for that are kind of that star variety. There are also 2 players on this Eagles team that Philadelphia could either deal to free up some money, to free up a roster spot, to include in a trade package to maybe entice a team to make a deal for a player that the Eagles covet. Derek Barnett, I think he's going to start getting outsnapped by Nolan Smith, and I think he should get outsnapped by Nolan Smith. He's done nothing this year, and at this point he's a better run defender than he is an edge rusher, but a team looking for a defensive end who's tough, who's had some decent quarterback hit and pressure production, who's also cheap. They could look to bring in a Derek Barnett. Rashad Penny is getting DNP'd pretty much every single week. He's been a healthy scratch, I think, every single week except for 1 up to this point, as the Eagles are now 6-1 going into, week 8 now. So if a team's looking for a backup running back, Rashad Penny, when healthy, he's been a problem. So players that the Eagles could trade for, talking about the offensive lineman earlier, star players that we just broke down, and then these 2 players that the Eagles could trade away in a deal to either get back a player or to free up a roster spot or some cash. I asked you a little bit earlier, name this Eagle. By no means is number 59 here to my right an Eagles legend. In fact, he's a bust. Mike Mamula, drafted by Philadelphia, 7th overall pick in 1995. Classic story. Coming out of Boston College, he was an NFL combine freak. Just a great athlete. That play never translated to great play for Philadelphia, but not every Name This Eagle on the segments that we do is going to be an Eagles legend. But if you got that right, good work by you. And if you're still watching, you're a real one.